All right, welcome back to another episode of the Black Bullion Show for goldandsilvertoday.com. Check that website out, everybody. Okay, so we've been taking stock of how Old Yella and the White Knight have been doing in recent times. Silver has completely blown past many assets, and gold has been earning its keep among the top tier assets this year as well. But today we're going to take a look at a report that digs into the details a bit more on this. But first, if you're new to this channel, please hit that big red subscribe button right down below. Also, please hit the like button. Helps to get this economic evangelism right on out there to the masses to bring more people into precious metals. Okay, so Jeff Clark has a new one out entitled Gold in Q3, Record Highs, Now Consolidating, and Coiling. So Jeff provides these graphs here, and the first one shows Q3 performance of major asset classes. Silver pretty much just left everybody in the dust in Q3. With a 33% increase. Gold had a modest 6.7% increase in Q3. Scrolling down a bit, we also have the 2020 performance of all the major asset classes. And, pretty much year to date. Silver is still in the 30s here at 31.5%. Gold is in third place at 23.9%. Of course, you're going to have the NASDAQ here in between at second place. It's going to be at, among some of the top tier in performance. But in general, let's compare real money, silver and gold, with fake money, which would be going all the way over here, the US dollar index. Now, the DXY is actually in negative territory pretty much year to date, which is crazy to think about. If you held dollars, as far as comparing it to a basket of other major currencies, it's been down negative 2.6%, which is crazy. Now, if you would have edged it over into these guys, you would have had a nice return. But all that to say, this leads me to Jeff Clark making a case for another precious metals run. So if you did happen to miss out on what happened here in 2020 year to date, this may be an opportunity, according to Jeff Clark. So let's get into it. While gold and silver were up for the quarter, both eased off their August highs and have since been consolidating. Another way to look at this, is this: they're coiling for another big run. How do we know there will be another big run? Perhaps the most important factor when looking at where the gold price might be headed is that there's not just one issue that could ignite it. Uncertainty persists in most segments of society. Despite a Fed-fueled surge in stock markets and stimulus amounts that could reach to the moon and back, the degree of unease in many areas of society simply isn't going away. In fact, it's hard to look at the horizon and not see numerous risks and thus numerous catalysts for gold and silver in both the short and long term. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these, but we've been talking a lot about the U.S. election as far as a catalyst. Social unrest, let's get into that. Protests and riots, particularly in the U.S., have persisted, leading to extreme calls like defund the police that would promise disaster if enacted. One insurer was quoted as saying the damages have reached catastrophic levels. Perhaps the most appropriate sign of social unrest was the U.S. Department of Justice declaring New York City, Portland, and Seattle as jurisdictions that permit anarchy, something that could affect their federal funding. U.S. dollar. We've talked about this quite a bit, so we don't need to go into that. We talked about what we call here the Ronies, so we don't need to go into that. Monetary stimulus. We've talked a lot about the monetary stimulus and fiscal stimulus. Let's get into that. As the quarter ended, U.S. politicians had still not agreed on the next stimulus package, though it almost certainly will be measured in the trillions of dollars. Meanwhile, US Treasury data show that total government spending in fiscal 2020 had reached 6.1 trillion by August 31st, a never before seen amount. The 2020 budget deficit now stands at 3 trillion, also a first, and means the government has spent 3 trillion more than it has taken in this year. The current budget deficit is now almost twice as large as the previous high in fiscal 2009. Now, of course, I've been on record on this channel and saying that I don't think a new stimulus package will pass until after the election. I do think talks will resume up until that point, pretty much in order to keep the markets elevated. But we'll see. Definitely could be wrong there. Real interest rates. We've talked about that quite a bit, especially earlier on in the year. Vulnerable stock markets. Let's look at this. All three major US stock indexes rose in Q3, pushing them to overvalued levels by any reasonable measure. In the same breath, we have to ask, to what extent does the Fed intervene again when the markets have their next correction or crash? And then we also have central banks. As a group, central banks were net buyers of 8.4 million ounces of gold during the first 7 months of the year. And guys, this is something that we've talked about quite a bit on this channel. I actually made a video about this too. So all of these are potential factors that could give rise to elevated gold and silver prices. So again, if you were on the wrong end of this deal, there's always a chance to get in while things are kind of, as Jeff Clark says, coiling. So if you are interested in, getting in on gold and silver, let me know in the comments section below. I'm actually pretty curious if you've just been on the sidelines, just kind of looking and waiting. Also, let me know if you've just been, buying this whole time, irregardless of prices being up or down and dollar cost averaging. I think quite a few of you guys are dollar cost averaging. So I'm actually pretty curious to learn more about, what led you to that, as opposed to maybe just going in on dips, which actually happens to be my strategy. But it also happens to be my strategy because of just the way that, my financial situation is pretty much right now with my job and everything like that. Everything's good, but there are certain things that come up that I'm paying for, and this, that, and the third. But I pretty much just go in on dips and stack cash in between. But let me know what your strategy is, or if you're looking to get in on gold and silver before it gets another big run. All right, guys, thanks again. It's Black Bullion for goldandsilvertoday.com.